electoral one. Once these two functions were created, there was also created a citizen participation council that is part of the transparency and social control function. To explain further, before this was an electoral was a court that talked about the legal and administrative subjects at the same time. So it would judge itself, basically anything that had against the political organizations. After the Constitution of 2008, there has a jurisdictional entity that's done in the contentious areas and an administrative one, and the other one of the National Electoral Council. And there's a council that there isn't a similar one in other parts of the world. So social control. So the new authorities can be appointed. This will be in the center of the assembly, so the parties could reach agreements, political agreements, to appoint an authority, a control authority, or another one. But from the 2008 Constitution, it's through a merit contest, but not from the citizen participation, but the citizenship, the citizens led them, and it was through the institutionality of the council that they worked. They had exams, they had citizen evaluation. So then we have the elections of 2017. Lenin Moreno, he aims to have the process of the former president Rafael Correa, and then he starts to apply to the government program of the right-wing candidate. So he called in a referendum when they asked the Ecuadorian people that if the corresponding one, if they agreed or not, if they did this contest or appointment of authority. So this created a domino effect. The five function of the states that we mentioned previously, three depended effectively on the appointments of the citizen participation of the judicial function, the electoral function, and the transparency and social control. Here we see how everything is structured, one that after becomes a political persecution. And that represents the great majorities. We are, because I was a counselor of Participación Ciudadana, they create this part sent by the executive so that they, in a transitory frame, can evaluate all the authorities. And they had to have contest and appoint new ones. What does this provisionary contest do? Well, what it does is that it assesses the authorities in an anti-legal way. I think only one of the judges was the one that was saved from this assessment, and the counterlord was he was never evaluated, and he stayed in his position, the comptroller. And this is where the whole part, they take out the judicial council, and through opposition merits to the councils and attorneys, they are destituted. They choose at their will, and this provisional council, they start taking out judges, district attorneys, and they, in a way, they appoint their replacement, but not by merits, but because they want to. Here we have the hand of Lenin Moreno at play in one of the provinces of the West. In the East, they and the other ones they do the same. They take them out of their post and they appoint provisional ones, and they carry out a period in which they carry out tests to put those that are in favor of the president. In the Council of Participación Ciudadana, they were not going to do a contest of merits in a position, but they had to be elected. But when they go to the voting polls, then the progressive forces win in the voting process. And when the councillors that were against everything that was done wanted to evaluate the provisional one and they won, they had the majority. What happens is that once they win, in less than 3 months, they have a political judgment and they are destituted. And then it was clear message sent: either you shape up or you're fired. So this armors the acting, the provisional council before leaving. It provides a super constitutional functions. This is something that was not possible. It's taking out, it has a vacancy of 5 months, and then appoints the current constitutional court. And one of the first acts in function was to armor the provisional council that named it, giving it that an aspect that nobody could analyze or can doubt the acts of this transitory council. And this transitory council also sets the controller that was never evaluated so he can stay in post in 2020. This was illegal and it violated human rights and international and national regulations. Let's go to what happens next. Through this comptroller, there is an administrative, because the comptroller is like a account. They have account court. They have more than comptroller exams. More than 500 of them have index of penal responsibility. Most of the officers that worked in the previous, more than 60 causes that we have began in the inter-American system as well as in the UN system as a civil society. And here we have the migrant, because the migrant community is very strong abroad. Because after the bank holiday, many Ecuadorians had to leave their home to send money to their family abroad, and they are very strong and they're not afraid of being persecuted. So through the migratory community, we have been saying, because people in Ecuador are afraid. The Attorney General is part of all this. Within these tests, she had 10 on over 20 in the knowledge exam. But they fixed the contest so that the interviews can be better evaluated or different evaluated. So if you get a low grade in the exam, when the interview was more important, and since it was subjective, she was the first one in the contest. She's prosecuted the former president, former officers in government of former President Correa. And here we can talk about why there is this background of persecution in the electoral area, which is different from the judicial one or legal one. We have a veto with the strength of the citizen revolution that followed former President Correa. So what happened? The current president of the Republic, Lenin Moreno, took the party Alianza País, which was the the cradle of Revolución Ciudadana. Then this party tries to enroll a movement called Revolución Alfarista because Alfaro was not a socialist or something along those lines. Then they gathered the signatures for the movement. They said no because they took the other authorities so that they couldn't do it. And then the National Electoral Council of Citizen Revolution joins at a given movement. Once they won the elections and they become the strongest political force, it's eliminated from the pattern because of the general comptroller of the state. Today, Correísmo has aligned with another party that it's also borrowed to give its candidates. And unfortunately, today they're going to decide in the National Electoral Council the elimination of this binomial. They want that the representation of the political movement that is the most voted, that has a 45.9% in the last polls, that even is eliminated, and that they can't go and compete in the next elections. It's important to know that as Ecuadorians, we're frustrated. There is no justice in Ecuador. We need elections that ensure us that there's going to be transparency, justice, equity in the next voting, in the next voting process. And this is what lacks Ecuador.
Listo. Mil gracias, doctora,
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your intervention. I know that there's a lot to say in a little time. I remind you that here it's 2:23 p.m. in Geneva, it's 7:23 in Quito. I will now give the floor to BA Fausto Carrin, who is a lawyer in the Republic of Ecuador, who's going to legally give us a context of what is happening today in Ecuador and all the problems that join what Dr. Veran just said. You have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias, David.
Thank you, David. I wanted to convey my welcome to great teachers and professors, Alfred and Dr. Luis Vargas. They represent something that we want to act on and activate on our country. And unfortunately, today we are talking about the shameful situation of which Ecuador is in. It's a pleasure to share with you, Sonia, and with you, Fernando. I know that Andres is also going to be here. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. With the preamble that Sonia gave, I'm going to go straight to what corresponds me as a lawyer of the former president of the penal causes of Rafael Correa. I've had to directly be victimized, a victim of what has been denominated lawfare in Ecuador, or a politicization of what happening, a lawfare. But those of us who are living and going through it and suffer for it, this takes us to a single aspect, the capacity that the state has to bring about the media, to use the fiscal office and the police against that this state power believes a risk, an opposition, a detractor, or however they would like to name him. In the case that we see before us today, after what we see today, Ecuador is without institution. It's It's not an attorney general that is not amongst the National Assembly, as the Constitution states. This attorney, 15 days from going there, because he never had a position, he links former President Correa in an alleged case of kidnapping to an alleged political activist that was hidden from a sentence for lies in Ecuador. Apparently, there was an apparatus in the national police that was following up to any person that escaped the justice in a very confused. This alleged activist, he is retained by citizens of Colombia. He was detained for 40 minutes, and when he was afraid because of a control, then they leave him free. Then they have an accident and they try to flee running. They are detained by the police, and then they immediately reach an agreement. A previous in Ecuador it would be called the abbreviated process, which is one to the self-incrimination or accepting the responsibility. The state has the capacity through the Attorney General's office and through the judges to negotiate the sentences down. These penal procedures, as in Ecuador and Colombia, have specificalities. They cannot be used as a proof against third parties because they will be going against the self incrimination and they would go to a biased test. Nevertheless, 6 years later, when the strict right and the process was written in Ecuador, then they rekindled this process. They have the international system with Colombia. And they request documents from Colombia. That was only that strengthened the case. There was no other evidence, nor new one, or anything. And using a figure that has become a modus operandi and on a permanent matter, or the trick for the which is the efficient voluntary. There are two police agents. They are very low ranks. They are allegedly linked to the intelligence that are efficient operators. Due to this, the Attorney General's office validates the testimonies of the accused that that are not with no contradiction and with no because these accused share to the Attorney General as unique and sole matter of proof documents. So a few days ago, he just gave a media press as a refugee in the brother nation of Argentina, telling the world that the anticipated testimony that he had to rent was done so in a forced manner because the Attorney General didn't send it to the Attorney General's office to give the anticipated testimony, but transferred to the offices that Sonia mentioned before, Julio Cesar Trujillo, who was president of the Transitory Council of Participation. He led the positioning of all these figures that today are the ones that persecute us, both legal, civil, administrative, voting, and even in the transparency aspect of this organism that is the Attorney General's Comptroller General's office. They took to these offices, and that the president of the Transitory Council, if Correa was not involved, he had to go 9 years to jail. He just said it in a press roll here in Ecuador. No media outlet has increased or magnified or widespread that news. But they opened a previous investigation with all the alternative media, community media, and small media that broadcasted the the press conference. In Ecuador, the scheme of lawfare is a book scheme, an encyclopedic scheme. Always, it's going to be in social networks, websites that don't even have an internal responsibility in the state. In Ecuador, a willing police officer immediately they know that in the social media and the attorney general's office start opening investigations with a lack of judges that dictate urgent acts that in Ecuador have been used lightly to take over housing, detain people. It's used permanently aggressively to have in- investigation crimes, and at the same time, the Attorney General's office has charges having these citizens detained and in Ecuador for more than 5 years. They can last up to 1 year. The use of the prison in Ecuador has reached outstanding limits. We are one of the countries. We are one of the countries that are most sanctioned. You know, doctors, that the abuse in prison has been an indiscriminated abuse. They have been preventing pressures just for assumptions, for speculations, and the judges that have honored to grant the substitution of measures or revocatory of preventing pressures, they've been taken out of their post. Like in the case of bribery, the first one that's done to the former legal advisor of the presidency, Alexis Nera, was taken out by two judges, the Attorney General's and the general prosecutor. They led a press campaign when they requested the destitution of the judges. 4 days later, these judges were destituted. These are international court ones as part of a press conference led by the main authorities of justice and transparency of the country. In the case of bribery, due to the time restraints, as we very precise, because we can talk for hours on this subject, we hope that we can further explain in detail. For example, this is it goes against the congruency principle. The General Attorney's Office investigated and accused all of an immediate authority of the power, which is the theory of the famous Professor Rosing, because the media was used to use this fraudulent structure. They were obliged not to declare but to ratify the state of innocence that does a normal and decent judge. When they when the attorney general's offices can prove it, they do is they change the author and they translate it and they do it through a psychic way. This is the way and the sentence that goes against Rafael Correa and Jorge Glass. They're trying to explain to the media and to make ridiculize and to irradiate a psychic way through its officers, and these officers in that way they carried out crimes. If we study this, we're going to have a lot of things to say, and the way the media has acted has been has been miserable in Ecuador. The media, even the public media, on behalf of the government, they have published text of the sentence. They have published screenshots before they are emitted and before we know the parties, the parts, the dates of the cases. We usually get to know in the official channels and the media. It's tormenting. Thank you, David. I hope that that it was clear what we're living in Ecuador. Thank you very much. Thank you for your intervention. Let's remember that this is in a context that is critical for the Ecuadorian society, for Latin America. Like we mentioned before, a referendum, a constitutional referendum in 2018, and this has given, and that today we are in the description that we are here. Without further ado, and explaining further in detail, I'm going to give the floor to Professor Fernando Casado, professor in Spain. Fernando, good afternoon in Spain, and you have the floor. Hello, David. How are you? Thank you for giving me the floor. And thank you all those here that are listening to us today. I believe that the idea today, due to the systematic ways of human rights, is to expose in a general way what is happening, and we hope to sensibilize this to the people that are listening to us, because the situation in Ecuador is very concerning, and until now it seems that many of the attention of the human rights organism has paid attention to this. I'm going to talk a bit about what the role has been on regarding the media and what we understand by lawfare. This is the unlawful use of the jurisdictional tools and use it as a weapon to destroy the political adversary. So this is what is currently happening in Ecuador. And what is the role that in this persecution process the media would play? Well, in one way or another, they legitimate and normalize the situation of political persecution, making it seem as legal, something that is completely illegal and that it goes against the pillars of democracy and the rule of law that Sonia explained and Fausto explained is being completely dismantled. This has to do with the role that Foucault had, that the media had, where they guide the public opinion. They try to derive a specific way, conscious of indi- of the individuals, and they try to go to a determined place. In this case, this power goes to eliminate a political force, which is correísmo, and that it's considered by the media itself in a political and economic way as an enemy to beat. This has a lot to do with this concept of media democracy. This is the fourth power that is part of all. And at the end, that the media, like Fausto says, has become a sort of judge that condemns or exempts, a judge that says the presumption of innocence and turns it in culpability. This shows the results of the judgments even before that they are public. That pressures the judges that they appoint sentences in one specific direction. That coordinates with the political power. How this type of persecution, political persecution, is going to be carried out, and how the headlines are going to be carried out to carry out this, that are working in an anti-democratic way. And when we go from the abstract to the specific, and we have seen as the normalization of the political persecution against correísmo, I'm going to read some headlines. Let's take into consideration that if we substitute the term correísta by the with the term Jew, black, or homosexual, we are be going against the great, massive violations of human rights in history. This is to expose of what happens of what is suffering a political force in a systematic way, that it's being prosecuted and violated in all its human rights. In Amazonas, who is one of the private channels in Ecuador, it's the time to decolonize the government. The media is involved in a process of purge of the Ecuadorian institutionality, in a way that being a part of Correa, it's a negative thing as itself. The other media that was also published, that Michelina talks of purge of those ways. the main media in 2018, they also talked about the government announced a purge to decolorize the executive. And the other media also said Moreno tries to decolorize the Ecuadorian state through a referendum. Then it's normal how something is should be ever terrible from a legal political point of view. We believe that the media support and legitimize this. Another behavior that regarding they've done what we know as framing, that in ways where they place tourism in a negative way, but to hide blatantly of that it gives it a positive way. A clear example of this, if when they have given of Equatorian institution red alarm of Interpol against different people of Correism. This is what happened in the case of President Correa or the foreign minister Ricardo Patiño or the former Secretary of Media or the Superintendent of Communication, Carlos Ochoa. And when the Interpol alarm was sent, then it was in the diaries and all the media. When it was Interpol, that is not a human rights agency, they rejected this red alarm because they were abusive according to the statute of Interpol for violating Article 2. That says that there is a violation of international human rights declaration. There was a red alarm against the four people that I've mentioned before. They were completely hidden by the media in Ecuador, which shows against what what is brought alongside between the economic and political areas. I would like to mention as well in the processes protest in 2019, which has been the cases of been of most elevation of democracy in 79, since 79 in Ecuador, where there were more than 11 dead due to military and police repression and more than 1,000 people and more than 1,300 people that were wounded. In these events, there were protests led by the indigenous people and the majority of the Ecuadorian people that was very hit by the liberation measures of the fuel prices that the Lenin Moreno government carried out. Lenin Moreno tried to convert Correísmo in the to say that they were leading the violent processes and to overthrow his own government as a coup d'etat. This was supported by the media in a study that we carried out in October by the Tory Springer. More than 150 opinion articles and editorial, and it was positioned in a negative way. The strength of Forreis or the forces of Forreis, and this happened the same in the opinion programs that were carried out those during those days in the main media channels, TV channels. The chains carried out by President Lenin Moreno, and I'm going to read and quote some of them that I believe deeply grave. On October 7, and Lenin Moreno said, and he quotes, Maduro has activated with Correa a destabilization process. Of this, there was no proof. There has been no investigation, but he said it just only to persecute Correismo. On October 12th, as well, Moreno in another presidential broadcast, because in those times the protests between 2 and 14 of October were committed 7 presidential broadcasts, and 4 of them they directly point out President Correa and President Maduro of being behind the protest on October 12th. Literally, says today, dark forces linked to the organized delinquency with narco-terrorism of Correa Maduro with foreign citizens, violence, foreign insurgencies that are causing trouble, violence. They went against the patrimony of the streets of Quito. They caused fear in many people. They kidnap police officers and their list of crimes for a day. Here we have the accusation not only is xenophobic, but it's unfounded, where the media, after did a grade of editorials, opinion articles supporting the thesis of the government, that to this role of the media of lawfare, they try to have through the propaganda, through the forces of correis, tourism, or deactivate the citizen mobility. This is taking that from one way, the hegemonic media have reduced this quality. For example, this is the participation that I had as a professor in Ecuador in a TV channel, private TV channel, of which then I was expelled from my work. So many people that identified as Correism, this is why they stopped appearing in the private media, but the private media have been closing the windows of plurality as time goes by. Within the media, the public media, what's happening, there has been purge of all those elements that are dissident to the hegemonic opinion. So many journalists that have been expelled, among the Javier Razo or Carlos Rabascal, who in with the binomial with presented with Correism, the candidate to vice president, and the government took a decision to close the public media. And there has been a persecution, like Fausto said, to have an investigation on behalf of the Attorney General's office to retransmit in a press conference opinion that it was uncomfortable for the government, and to welcome all those media that have had a dissident opinion or against all the alternative media or media that have not adapted to the hegemonic guidelines, as the Radio Pichincha that has been a closed radio station and that nothing has been said about it. In conclusion, there is a clear persecution against Correism in the media, where the media is playing a fundamental role. And I believe that we should be investigated by the international organizations. I hope that I didn't abuse my time. Thank you. Professor, thank you very much for your intervention and for the panorama that you have given to us. I believe we're going to invest to invert roles because we have Andres Arauz, the candidate who is here, and I'm going to give him the floor, and then we will have the former Commissioner Luis Ernesto Vargas, and then we will finish off with Alfred de Sayas. Without further ado, candidate, good afternoon from Geneva, good day for you in Ecuador. 7:49 in Quito, 2:49 here in Switzerland. Candidate, you have the floor. Thank you, David. Thank you for this invitation. This opportunity is great to be able to talk with you and comment of the political restrictions that we're living in Ecuador. Besides of what my colleagues have said, I wanted to shortly express how we have reached this point in our intentions in the electoral participation, as in the government processes that are linked with the civil political rights of the Ecuadorians. It's important to highlight that if we go to the Latin American progressive, we are a very important current in the region and as well as in Ecuador. We have won 14 democratic victories, firm believers in democracy. We used the new constituent that went to two referendum processes and one of ratification, and in all elements with vast democratic support. One of the last actions regarding electoral democracy was a people consultation in 2017, where we promoted the need that our politicians don't have goods in fiscal paradises offshore so that we can have a real transparency in politics. And this has something to do with this very difficult time we're facing after Lenin Moreno won with Alianza País. Our political and our progressist forces were excluded from this party from judicial ways or from behalf of the government. And this was the first problem politically. Then we started to create a new political instrument that was called Revolución Ciudadana, which was rejected by its name itself. And then we had another one which was called Revolución Alfarista, which name was the Liberal Ecuador of Alfaro. And then they said no, Alfaro was liberal and not left wing, and thus we could not continue with the paperwork for this. We can see the absurd of this process. Then we tried to reactivate a national agreement movement where more than 500,000 signatures were collected to activate it. But a few days after presenting the signatures to this political one, the National Electoral Body substituted the board of direction a few days before, stopping us from advancing in the process. After that, we created a series of political alliances between the Socialist Party of Ecuador that also had a change of the board of directors a few days before to formalizing the alliance with us. And without being able to have in the public area to avoid this persecution against us, few days before the elections of 2019, we aligned with forces that we couldn't have a candidate in all areas because it was an operation that we had to do outside the public opinion to avoid threats to this. And we were the movement that was mostly voted in the country with two of the third largest states in Ecuador, many of area councils. This has given us a superior. But in this year, a day before the elections, if 2021, it was the electoral voting register was eliminated. We have appealed clearly, we have disputed this decision, but it's a clear way that politically they are trying to block our political extension. Thanks to the way that we have worked away from the public opinion, we created an alliance with another party that was called the Democratic Center, who opened the door so that progressiveness can be expressed through it. And this is how we reached to where we are today. It was a long history of persecution and political persecution, not only to people. And today we are part of this to participate in the presidential elections next year. There has been part that has been created after Rafael Correa, leader of the movement. I'm sorry, there is no sound. I believe the speaker is muted. After this, there was a case against them, attempting against the civil and political rights, and now they're trying to eliminate me as a presidential candidate without any reason whatsoever. The only thing that they've said, it goes against Rafael Correa, an express sentence. Now, my participation is also threatened, and the representation of all the progressism. We see this as a threat, not only to our rights of political participation, but that of millions of Ecuadorians, one third of the population, that they have their preference, that it's clear with progressiveness, and that they will not be able to participate in an election. So we believe that the electoral, the human rights not only that should only be taken into consideration the day of elections, but this week as well. Today, when we're going to decide if they qualify or not to the binomial as progressivism is represented, we are convinced Democrats of we have 14 electoral victories when we believe in the people's consultation mechanisms and the democratic mechanisms. And today we are facing this situation where in Ecuador not only is threatened the political wars that we have to regain, but the economic one and administered by the monetary fund in for sectors linked to different financial power of another country, to the power of the citizenship of the majority of Ecuadorians. This is the situation we undergo in Ecuador, and we call upon the international community, to the international organizations, the NGOs, and the civil society to be vigilant because we see a real threat to the democracy in Ecuador, and we wouldn't want this to turn out in a negative social implosion. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that I can meet with you guys not only this positive decision, but also next year we will be in Ecuador celebrating an electoral victory on the center of public policy, and it has been our commitment and our history. Thank you, candidate. Thank you for your time. We know that you have a very short time at hand, and the National Human Rights Association and Human Rights, alongside with the European, with we did a communicate 2 days ago denouncing what is happening in Ecuador, something that is concerning, something that we transmitted to the Office of the High Commissioner here in Geneva, and the special procedures that are part of this to put their hands on this matter, and this perspective can have an international perspective, and to be able to act on the international organizations that most of the times are not seen. Then from the international organizations, from the regional to the most global, I will now like to give the floor to Dr. Luis Ernesto Vargas, who was ex-former High Commissioner of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, former President of the Constitutional Court in Colombia. Doctor, you have the floor. Good day for you in Bogota. Good day, David. Can you hear me? Perfectly. Good day to you, young professor, Professor David Joves, and for my fellow panelists. Since the time is limited in this virtual forum, is to say that the visit done by the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Ecuador gave us very concerning perceptions. I would like to refer specifically to three of them. One, in the name of installing yourself in a place where President Lenin, they violate the welcome process. We believe that they were trying to take to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights to share the vision that they have of a government. So we believe that they were doing a kind of a closing session instead of guaranteeing the autonomy that should be had by a human rights organization such as the Commission. This first part what impacted us because we were there. Secondly, I believe that I found it very concerning when we held the meeting with the Constitutional Court president, because in that way, who manipulates on behalf of the commission, it was me who did everything to have a sort of dialogue or an interrogation that because it's a constitutional one, to tell us how, through the Constitutional Court, to support Decree 1884 done by the Interior Commission. And they left us very concerned the way that corresponded to the Constitutional Court precedent, because I believe that there was no full understanding of the knowledges that they were doing it in an interior level. So, because they have a perception, which is a very biased one in my opinion, in favor of the government, and this is quite concerning because they need to be truly autonomous and independent. So, when a judge, a constitutional judge, has a vision that is biased in favor of the government, what can you expect, or what can you do when judging the acts of government? I believe that there is no independence as a whole there on behalf of this organization. And I believe the decision through which the alleged constitutionality was about this decree, it's a decision taken as an unfounded decision of what is happening in Ecuador. And thirdly, we were very concerned of what happened in the jail in Atacunga. This is when they arrested a commissioner that today is Commissioner Gurrejola, and we're creating a lot of suspicion that, among other things, maybe the only one, there was no inadequate attention to the commission. Based on this is what I would like the most, David, and my fellow panelists. She issued a communique dated 14 January 2020. In this communique, you can find all the perceptions that we divide ourselves in four working groups to visit various places in Ecuador. We talked to all the authorities. Obviously, they are defending the government and its vision within the framework of the protest. That the indigenous of Ecuador are a true example for Latin America because of their strength, by their solidarity by the solidarity that they try to revindicate themselves. And we were also very concerned the way that everything related to them with the indigenous leaders, who it's clear to see, I felt like I was in Colombia, as if they were the great rich men. Speaking of a person that being indigenous that had its own airplanes, and the way that it's stigmatized, the way it's like to have the protest of the right to social protest. In this communique that gathers the value of hundreds of testimonies that we received, hundreds of dialogues that we held with people alongside the institutions of the state, and then we explained that the use of the state should be planned in a careful manner, that there be clear acting protocols that guarantee the use of adequate weapons, that they do not use lethal weapons, that the response of the state be proportional and in accordance to human rights, and that they favor the dialogue amongst parties. So, in that sense, every time that there's violence against a protest, the protest becomes violent, obviously. They don't authorize the security forces to solve the protest be after the use of force. Everything was in part will be part in of the communique that I would invite you to read and read it, because this is coming becoming a real political pandemia of a bad handling of resources of a dictatorship way. This is what happened with Ecuador. This is what happened after with Chile, after with Bolivia, and in what I believe, Colombia. I believe that the expression of what the democracy is going to face in the worst time of violation of human rights that we are going through. I've been saying this and explaining it. I've said it a lot in the headquarters of the commission since 2018, and this has been. We have verified that they have done it. We are in the worst leadership in human rights in history. Here are some recommendations that I would like for you to read, and we digest it and we discuss it, because based on the American Convention on Human Rights, they recommended the state of Ecuador, and this has to do with all the governments on this part of the continent, to respect and guarantee the right to protest their freedom of speech, that they can hold peaceful demonstration and political participation in the population, that they're not stigmatized by the opposition in such a terrible and evil way, to have immediate plans and special preparation for the protest and their families. That from then, I don't remember if it was 10 or 12, I don't remember. Here in Bogota, 7, 8, and 9 September, in an area, there was the same amount of people dead, and they have been established that they have been with bullets of the national police. We also mentioned in the communique of January 20 of 2020, we had to guarantee the right to expression. This is very important, but there as well, there's a huge bias on behalf of the majority of the media, that they are no longer independent, that they are controlled by the states, power groups, which is more concerning. So if the commission asked to visit journalists and communicate with them, to have the information of public protest, that they should not be detained or threatened, to not be able to carry out their work. But then we have to be objective, that why are you on the media? We also told the Equatorian state that we had to maintain from the highest state level of state, have a dialogue process by the economic situations assumed by the authorities. And this is from what we're listening today, this has not been tended to, because the obligations here have increasing, and I believe it's very bad. I also say al Estado Ecuatoriano, because there are measures to investigate and sanction those responsible of all the violent acts through protest. And according to what we saw, that we haven't had, and this has been there for 8, 9 months, to communicate with the Ecuadorian government. But it would seem like if the persecutions through different movements have increased from from Cardo. And we also talked that we had to adopt measures to guarantee the right of the child, teens, and women to participate in social manifestations or protest with freedom of assembly, expression, and meeting. So what we remember, which was to maintain to the call for peace, to dialogue, to avoid stigmatization, and to have a dialogue process in the whole sectors of the society. We believe that it's something that is not being complied with, and I believe it's very bad because if the only thing that democracy has left is the intervention of international organizations, and this expressed in a way of having complied with the work, like the one we did in Ecuador, but we believe it to be very concerning that they are not complying with this. So just basically to finish off, I would like to remind you that the Ecuadorian government was told to advance in the investigations regarding the death of indigenous people, but that they are effective investigations, independent investigations, and that they lead to the functioning of those responsible. Something we haven't heard so far. And with the participation of indigenous organizations to be able to train in the field of human rights and and intercultural cultural area to maintain the public order. So I have a great concern, David and panelists, regarding what the recommendations have led through in the communique of January 14, 2020, on behalf of the Ecuadorian government. Thank you very much for inviting me, and we are already here for anything that you need. Thank you, Doctor, former president of the Constitutional Court of Colombia, who says that we're going undergoing the worst and critical human rights moment in the region, something that has been seen, even if they've been trying to hide it, a great amount of media, and has even been able to hide in international organizations as the Human Rights Commission and the UN. Let's remember that Professor Alfred de Sayas, before he concluded his mandate, an official visit to Venezuela, he took advantage to do official visit in Ecuador, and who wrote a report, and who we are also going to ask to give us his perspective as a former special rapporteur of what he saw and what we can recommend today to the Ecuadorian civil society, that they are going through this subject of violation of human rights. To explain what we can do before these international institutions, have they've done from Bogota, Luis Ernesto Vargas, professor. Good afternoon here in Geneva. Good afternoon, and thank you, David, Sonia, Fausto, Fernando, y Andrés, y Luchito, and Luchito. I'll be short. The important aspect is that it's clearly diagnosed, and we have the facts. What are we doing with these facts? 3 years ago, when in December, November, I was in a UN official visit to Venezuela and Ecuador. My purpose as a special rapporteur for an international and equitable order was to study how the civil and political culture and political rights advanced in the framework of the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela and the Citizen Revolution in Ecuador. So my experience in Venezuela was that the government opened all the doors for me. I could speak to the opposition. I was able to speak to all the agencies. I think I met with like 16 people. I met with the professor, with the students. It was a successful mission because the result that they freed a great number of prisoners. Roberto Picon was released. 80 people were released 3 weeks after I left. But when I go to Ecuador, I see that the government is very reserved. They didn't only cancel a series of interviews. Citizen revolution was not a citizen one. They were retiring from the social, economic, and cultural process that was done in the 10 years of Rafael Correa. Nevertheless, I didn't have the opportunity or the chance to see the anomalies that happened because I went to my visit on 17th December in 2017. If I would go today to visit Venezuela, to to have a dialogue process with the sorry, to visit Ecuador and to dialogue with the ministers in Ecuador, I would make very important and strong questions. So on the enjoyment of peaceful protest, the enjoyment of the right to association, political associations, the right to participate in elections, the right to freedom of expression. This right would have a just and equitable process to have an independence of the mayor's office. So these are things that I tried to investigate when I was there in December 17th in Ecuador, but I did not see the unmantling of the rule of law that we can see today. Today we have to point out and that there is going a very grave backwards resolution of human rights in Ecuador, as in Tubarium in Brazil, for example, and the persecution of progressive forces, of politicians. That, as you know, I was for many years secretary of the Human Rights Committee in the UN, and I was the head of commissions and complaints department. That the fact, this political and civil rights pact here we can see with all the information given to us in the last 3 years, and I have not abandoned my interest because of what happened in Ecuador. We have to see that there are violations of Article 6, which is the right to life. There are violations to Article 7, to the treaty, Article 9, Article 10 of the commissions, in prison, Article 14, the dependency of the Attorney General's office, Article 19, 20, 22, and Article 20, 25. It's the article on political participation. Because the persecution of the progressive forces in Ecuador is something that is so shameful as the use of the legal apparatus to destroy political opponents. This is something that is quite concerning. What should we do? Well, the Committee of Human Rights, in accordance to the facultative protocol, has the ability to issue, to ask the state cautionary measures. Tell the state it's not acceptable that you're going to exclude a political party from the participation in the 2021 elections. This has been done by the Human Rights Committee regarding countries in the Baltic countries, in Belarus, etc. So that there is a vast background to ask the Committee of Human Rights cautionary measures. Also, regarding the daily suffering of Jorge Glass, I spoke to the assistant of the High Commissioner. I have an assistant that have a very vast file about the abuses that he has been victim of. But it's actually scandalous how lawfare has become the practice on a daily basis, not only in Ecuador, but as well in Brazil. We know that starting the case of Lula, this is something that we have to send to the Human Rights Committee, a complaint with all the necessary documents, at least to wither the internal resources. And we have to send this type of information to Diego Garcia Sayan, who is the rapporteur on the legislature independence, send the new rapporteur on freedom of expression, who is Annalene Can. I also know her. So is there a series of mechanisms in the UN that can be used besides the mechanisms of the Human Rights Commission of Human Rights, those according with a letter of the Organization of the American States. There is no doubt for me that why the democratic letter should be used in the dismantling of this rule of law in Ecuador. Honestly, I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for the Ecuadorian people. I had the opportunity when I was there to speak to the churches, to the bishop, to the indigenous people, with the ombudsman, among others, and I learned many things, and I learned to appreciate them. There was an Ecuadorian that I liked a lot. He's a former member of the Human Rights Committee, Julio Grado Vallejo. He's a great man, and I am sure that there are great men in Ecuador. The problem is that these great men in Ecuador are politically persecuted. They are victims of the same kind of this alleged lawfare that is poisoning the system as a whole of Latin America. So we are going back to the military commissions in Uruguay, Argentina, in Chile, and it would be sad that all the progress made by Rafael Correa as president for 10 years will be lost. It will be very sad that if history maintains or will remember Mr. Lenin Moreno as a sort of dictator, that a tyrant, a politician as Lukashenko in Belarus or Erdogan in Turkey. We hoped, and this is something that I expressed in my report to the General Assembly, to the Human Rights Council, sorry, in 2018, the report on my visit to Ecuador, that there was a lot of potential in Ecuador, and that my experience with the people, to those that I interviewed, was a positive experience, and I supported quite a lot the programs of the citizen revolution that were not only compatible, but that they advanced in international order, in the international democratic order and equitative order. If today I would have to write a report on Ecuador, it would be to express the retrogression, the going back of human rights, followed by a never ending list of recommendations to the government of what they should do to repair the damage made, and so that the country can live in peace, that the indigenous people are not stepped on, and that the politicians and all the parties can participate as required in Article 25 of the Relative Pact regarding to civil and political rights. I've been very solidary with Ecuadorian people, and I wish you that democracy reemerges and that the elections in 2021 have a good result. Thank you.
Mil gracias, profesor Alfredo Sayas,
Thank
por
you,
la
Professor Alfredo
exposición.
Sayas,
Recordemos
for this
que
point. Let's remind ourselves that
la
if you
primera
were a rapporteur, if you had to draft a report in Ecuador, it would be to of going back in human rights.
en Ecuador es
In Ecuador, this is 3:27 in Geneva,
8:27 de la mañana.
8:27 in Quito and Bogota.
Tenemos varios
We have a
comentarios
few
online
comments
por la
online
asociación,
of the
donde
association where since
Colombia
Colombia they
da
give
mucho
us a
apoyo
solidarity support to the
al
people of
Ecuador,
Ecuador.
presente con
Pre-
Ecuador.
we are present with Ecuador.
Viva Rafael
Long
Correa,
live Rafael Correa.
cantidad de perseguimiento, lo
We
acompañamos a
accompany you. They compare with the government of Álvaro Uribe and the current government.
una cantidad de
And a
personas
series of comments here that are
que
shown,
de una manera u otra también
and
están
that one way or another
también desde
show us that they are seeing us from Switzerland, here from Lucerne, from London, from Brussels,
pues España,
from Spain, Paris.
muchos lugares del
Many places in the world are seeing us, and when this video is there, a lot many others will see them. Let's remember that this invitation has been sent to member countries of the Human Rights Council, to members of the Office of the High Commissioner, Special Procedures, who we wait take note on what we are saying here, that they take action on the matter, and that they can follow up everything that we have denounced that is happening in Ecuador and that we don't hear much of, and that in one way or another we have to solve in the best way possible, in the best democratic way. Because it's not going violence is not going to take us to a road to peace, social justice as it's demanded by the region.
no veo
I
más
see no further questions on the live.
entonces de pronto entre
And I
panelistas
don't know if amongst panelists, if you want to have a questions amongst yourselves, any interaction, I don't know.
habría de pronto podríamos comenzar
Maybe we can start with a specific area we drafted alongside a communique to respect Article 25 of the Civil and Political Rights that Alfred de Sayas mentioned regarding the right to be elected in a democratic, free way, secret voting, where unfortunately we haven't had any response on the international community nor the government. What can we hope from this? Take it to the Committee of Human Rights as a petition in accordance with the facultative protocol of the Civil and Political Rights Protocol. Ecuador is a state party of the pact, and as part of the facultative protocol, and the committee has the power to take a decision asking the government cautionary measures and telling the government that it's imperative that all the parties and candidates can participate without problems in the government of Lenin Moreno. So I emphasize Article 25 of the Pact and the possibility of denouncing the violation of this that has been violated many times previously. not only today, not only related to the elections of 21, there has been a systematic violation of Article 25 of the Pact in Ecuador. Another point that has not been raised, and I believe it's necessary because it shows the treason of Ecuador international law and to the refugee right to the Geneva Convention on Refugees, the case of Assange. Assange had the diplomatic asylum and the acknowledgement of being someone that was persecuted, someone that would abide by international law and by the obligation of non-refoulement. What the government of Lenin Moreno does in delivering Julian Assange to the UK authorities has been condemned strongly by the working group of arbitrary detention. It has been condemned by the special rapporteur on torture, Professor Melser, who has produced a report on the abuse of lawfare and working together of the intelligence organs of the US and the UK and the dismantling of the warranties of an equitable process in the UK, something that translates to the dismantling of the state of law of the rule of law, sorry, of the institutions in the UK. Thus, Ecuador has the responsibility of the consequences of its decisions to abandon the protection granted to Julian Assange. So anything that happens to Julian Assange after being expelled from the embassy in London is responsibility of Ecuador, and Ecuador has the obligation to repair the damages to Mr. Assange, who I had the opportunity of personally meeting and visiting in April 2015 in the embassy, in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, since I was writing a report to the General Assembly on the problems of the free trade treaties. And he just published, WikiLeaks had just published a series of these treaties that were secret. Nobody knew them. And for me, it was of great importance to study these aspects and to ask Julian Assange how to interpret this and how him understood it. I had a very positive impression of Mr. Assange, and the lies told on of Julian Assange are beneath human. To do with Herrick is something that concerns me, how he's been stigmatized in the media and how colleague Fernando Bisoño and Fausto have indicated a great problem is the complicity of the media, of the international media, that the BBC, CNN, Fox News, or the Deutsche Welle, the Diario of las Americas, that de-informized the Julian Assange and that they maintain all sort of cartoons or lies against Mr. Assange. Professor here in Ecuador holds the responsibility of everything that has happened after he was expelled. And honestly, I join my voice to the judgment of Niels Mesters that it's about a torture against Mr. Assange. Thank you, Professor, for your answer. And we have a question for Dr. Luis Ernesto Vargas. We have a series of conflicts
Está la
between the
CIDH.
OAS, the
Esto
Commission of Human Rights. Would this affect the work of the Commission vis-a-vis what is happening in Ecuador? How do you see this? I know that this is a delicate subject, but it would be interesting to know that behind this, Ecuador would have would have some consequence, or on the contrary, would be an independence of everything that the Commission is handling. Thank you, David. And I excuse for what I said. I had to leave. But regarding this question, that it's a very complex question, I give my opinion with a certain freedom, and the freedom given that no longer being linked to the Commission. But I believe very concerning what happened recently, how Paulo Dorado left, an extraordinary worker in the defense of human rights, as we have said and demonstrated in UNISUR.
Cosas más lamentables
I
que
believe that this is
existen en
some of the most regrettable things that exist. Why? Because here, this was an imposition, and this is very troubling, an attempt that goes against independence and autonomy of the Commission in the appointment of its organism, or its body, sorry. And in this case of Paulo Arau. And a role that I believe that it's a nefarious one is the one done by the current Secretary General of the OAS in this card, and how it affected the result, the corresponding result. This only doesn't undermine the autonomy of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights had regarding the OAS, but also shows that there are strong wings ahead against democracy in Latin America. We know the nefarious role played by this person from the secretariat of the OAS in the coup d'état in Bolivia, because it was through a report that was then established because it was a biased report. So here we still have the fake news, we still have falseness before us, and this comes from the current government of the United States, and it has been going through, and it has been expanded through America as a whole. And that's why the dictatorial governments that are being imposed are the representation of what I already said was the historical moment that was the shameful one on human rights. So regarding this, I believe at the end, Paulo Arau was the independent, that the work that was given to him of the International Commission of Human Rights to Bolivia, where he saw the vulneration of human rights, the massacres against indigenous people after the coup d'etat. That today they fostered this person that has fostered this persecution against the indigenous, that supported president-elect that Bolivia had. This is going to impact the criteria the process going through in Ecuador, and I believe that this will see it in the Latin American governments. We had seen this. This is what I've called in the commission, what I call the contemporary coup d'etat. Today, they are alongside from the north and through the Latin American Parliament. And we believe that alternative governments are going to have a lot of at least survival instincts, and this is why we have the Latin American democracy. Thank you very much. Now you have short time, and you can leave the panel when you want, because I want to thank the interpreting services who are still here. It's a very strong effort, and they are to be able to interpret us into English. This is a video that you will have in our YouTube, on our channel, sorry, and that you can listen to it so that it can reach other parts of the world. I would also like to make a short reference or short question, maybe a philosophical question to Professor Fernando Casal Foucault said that the most bloody tenderness and bloodies of powers need confession. What does this has to do with the Ecuadorian government, Professor? I believe that it's a very philosophical question. I believe that it's hard not to recognize the violation that it's done to the principles. To our country in this policies in Ecuador, as Lenin Moreno, as many systematic violators of human rights, how they justify what they're doing in the country. They're doing a persecution, a political group of Correism, how they justify it. Because if not, they will not be able to survive believing that they have a reproachable behavior. It would be good to understand how this is justified, or how it's justified this execution to a political group that is a very determined one, the same as the journalists, editors, they have a systematic manipulation that change the facts, that clearly show in their agenda some events on others, and that they will recognize how they will become judges or the going of the deontological codes through councils of human rights. The, they carried out their actions through dictatorships in this process. I apologize, by the interpretation service is done now. Thank you very much.
Y políticamente me gustaría saber los violadores de derechos humanos cómo se ven a sí mismos, cómo justifican lo que yo estoy seguro que son conscientes de sus acciones.
Listo, mil gracias, profesor. En el concepto del campo jurídico de Bourdieu, justamente se construye a partir del concepto del campo social, ¿no? Bien lo decía él. Y el campo es un espacio social, ¿no? En el que las relaciones se definen según un tipo especial de poder o de capital específico detentado por los agentes que entran en la lucha o en la competencia del mismo. Licenciado Harim, ¿qué podríamos decir aquí recordando a Bourdieu con esta frase? detento económico, intereses de abajo, capital social que viene a hablar aquí, de pronto haciendo un análisis del Ecuador, cómo se percibe todo esto, ¿no? Desde esta sociología jurídica que se viene a implantar aquí y lo que a usted le amerita como reflexión, incluyendo pues esta anotación que hago aquí de Bourdieu, licenciado. No sé si nos escucha. Creo que ha perdido la señal. No sé si nos escuchan. En todo caso, bueno, como sabemos que la doctora Sonia Vera también es abogada, entonces le vamos a rebotar la pregunta, ¿no? ¿Qué le amerita esta reflexión, ¿no? Con respecto a lo que vemos actualmente en el Ecuador, ¿no? Un capital social que evidentemente hay actualmente en el Ecuador, que tiene una fuerza, pero que está siendo callada también por algunos sistemas jurídicos que están siendo manipulados por el medio del lawfare. Doctora.
Gracias, David. Mira, realmente no debemos olvidarnos la historia del Ecuador. Ecuador viene de una crisis de institucionalidad en el año 99 sin precedentes, que nos trajo 11 presidentes en 10 años. Entonces el tema es darnos cuenta de que la ciudadanía ahora está adormecida, porque efectivamente la ciudadanía tiene fe en estas elecciones que van a venir. Por eso está contenida. Sumémosles también el tema de que por el COVID hubo un estado de excepción que se le impedía a la ciudadanía poder hacer manifestaciones. Esa es la realidad del Ecuador. Ahora lo que se espera en el caso supuesto y no consentido de que se llegase a vetar al binomio por la esperanza, UNES, yo creo que el escenario que se viene es mucho peor que el que ocurrió en octubre del 2019. Creo que van a haber muchos más muertos, van a haber personas heridas, la gente se va a tomar a las calles, porque no solamente existe la desesperanza de que ni siquiera las elecciones van a servir de algo, también existe la crisis económica, los despidos masivos en el sector privado, los despidos masivos en el sector público, la precarización laboral. Entonces, son muchos factores que se están sumando a ese gran descontento y se ve reflejado en el nivel de aceptación que tiene Lenín Moreno actualmente de su gobierno. Entonces, la gente está esperando con ansias las elecciones, y actualmente lo que pretende hacer el Consejo Nacional Electoral es quitarnos la única esperanza de volver a tener un gobierno que piense en la justicia social de los ecuatorianos. Por eso que es tan importante este evento, para que la comunidad internacional, la delegación de los países que son parte de la ONU, entiendan de primera mano cuál es la realidad de los ecuatorianos y qué estamos haciendo desde el exterior, la comunidad migrante, qué está haciendo cada ciudadano al ir a protestar, porque es lo único que nos quedan las calles, y que la comunidad internacional y los organismos de derechos humanos vuelquen su mirada al Ecuador y se den cuenta que estamos en una dictadura y que existe una crisis sin precedentes que nos está quitando la democracia y violentando flagrantemente los derechos humanos de los ecuatorianos.
Mil gracias, doctora. Dictadura es lo que leemos también aquí en los comentarios de YouTube Live. Bueno, nosotros hemos terminado con este evento paralelo, con esta ronda de preguntas, recordándoles una vez más que pueden seguir este evento en retransmisión por el canal de AIDS, ¿no? Asociación AIDS en YouTube. La pondremos también en inglés. Podrán ver también los eventos anteriores sobre medidas coercitivas unilaterales en el tiempo del COVID, donde tuvimos la participación de la relatora especial sobre las medidas coercitivas unilaterales, la bielorrusa Aliana Duan, y al igual el evento paralelo que se hizo sobre ejecuciones extrajudiciales e injerencia extranjera en el caso de Colombia, donde tuvimos también la posibilidad de participación y de escuchar al profesor Alfred de Sayas en este evento paralelo, entre otros panelistas supremamente importantes como el senador Alberto Casilla. Sin más, yo despido esta transmisión. Mi nombre es David López, representante de la Asociación Internacional de Derechos Humanos y Desarrollo Social. Les agradezco muchísimo por la participación a todas y todos los panelistas, muy amables, y esperemos que este evento le pueda dar más luces a una sociedad que hoy por hoy despierta y con qué talante. Mil gracias y hasta pronto. Perfecto. ¿Ya salió todo bien? ¿Me escuchan? ¿Aló?